Convicted pedophile Peter Whitmore will appear in an Ontario courtroom today. He was arrested in British Columbia last week and is charged with violating his probation after he went on the run 3 weeks ago. Joining us now in the studio is Karen McArthur, defense lawyer who represents many accused pedophiles, and from Ottawa, Stephen Sullivan, president of the Canadian Resource Centre for Victims of Crime. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Karen, let me start with you. He's charged with breach of probation. Explain the process and whether you think police handled it correctly.
Well, I have some concerns about the police going to the media before arresting Peter Whitmore and telling the community that they were going to arrest him. And I'm wondering about that. That may well have caused him to go on the lam or run. Stephen,
there's any talk in this country in the past that police don't go to the media enough and the public enough to warn them of, convicted pedophiles when they're back out on the street. What's your reaction?
Well, it's very rare that police would go to the community and warn them about a particular pedophile. It's happening more and more because we have more and more of these people coming out of our prisons. But I mean, to blame the police for the actions of Peter Whitmore, I think is not accurate. This is an individual who has shown time and time again a willingness to breach his probation, to come into contact with children and to molest them. It's the police's fault that he took off.
That raises a big question, actually, the fact that they're out of prison in the first place. And I want you to give me your thoughts, Karen, on, whether or not these people should actually have to do their maximum time in prison.
I don't think so, because if they serve their maximum time, they're not released into the community with safeguards. If we put them on probation or parole, they are watched by people that are trained to watch them, and they are on court orders.
Well, then why are there 3 probation charges if they're being watched?
Well, Peter obviously went on the run 3 weeks ago. One of the breaches is that he was with a child under the age of 18, apparently in the presence of adults, which is a curiosity, and that he didn't obey by his curfew, and that he just took off. Apparently in British Columbia he was also found with a weapon or something.
But that charge has actually been dropped.
Been stayed.
Stephen, what do you think on that point?
Well, I think, parole works for a lot of who can be released in the community and need a little bit of assistance. The problem is when you have someone like Peter Whitmore and pedophiles who have a very high recidivism rate, it doesn't matter if you put them on parole. It doesn't matter unless you have a parole officer with them 24 hours a day. These people have a very high recidivism rate, particularly pedophiles like Peter Whitmore. And if you give them the chance, they will reoffend.
Now, this is a guy who the court tried to have a tracking device and the judge said no. So do you support tracking devices if you that pedophiles need to be monitored once they leave the prison system?
If they're properly supervised, yes, but I think the difficulty that Judge Shepard faced last fall was that the Attorney General and the Solicitor General didn't have the proper resources in place for the tracking system. The Crown wanted it, but it just wasn't properly available. It wouldn't have worked.
Is the public safe, Stephen, in general, if these tracking devices that exist are not being used?
Well, the judge made a good point that it's not a question of whether he should have been on a tracking device, it's whether this particular tracking device would have really made a difference. And I think it probably wouldn't have, and the Solicitor General or the Minister of Corrections in Ontario is looking at an improved tracking device, which seems to offer some better protection for society. But at the end of the day, as long as we have a system that will release people like Peter Whitmore either early or at the end of their sentence, untreated, who are still at risk to society, society is going to be at risk. It's going to be children who are victimized.
And how do you protect society then?
Well, in 1993, the Liberal government, before they became government, made a promise in their Red Book that they would send sex offenders who were still at risk to reoffend at the end of their sentence to mental institutions for further treatment. They've never done that. And until there is some mechanism in our system to say, look, you've reached the end of your sentence, but you're still at risk, we're not going to let you go. Until we do that, we're always going to be at risk from people like Peter Whitmore.
Karen, talk about the danger offender legislation then.
Well, that's in place. There's also the dangerous sex offender legislation, and in Ontario and many other provinces, Steve, there is in fact mental health legislation that judges can have recourse to at the end of a person's sentence. So it's not accurate to say that it isn't in place at all.
Do you agree that it should be used more often, though? Why not use it more often?
I think it should be used judiciously, because if you use it too frequently, people will just be ending up serving life sentences for offenses that don't warranted.
It's incredibly difficult to use that, and the inquest into the death of Christopher Stevenson, who was murdered by a sex offender who spent his life in a mental institute and was finally kicked out because they couldn't treat him. That inquest showed how incredibly difficult it is to send someone to a mental institution after serving their sentence. The mental health system is not currently set up to deal with people like Peter Whitmore.
All anybody wants in this country, I should think, and anywhere, is to keep pedophiles off the streets, away from children. Karen, what is the solution in Europe? How can the government and the judicial system deal with this?
I agree with Steve that there are gaps in the system, but I think the way to deal with it is to deal with it cooperatively, collaborate. I have done that in one case, worked successfully with the police and integrated a quite notorious pedophile back into the community successfully without any breaches. But it takes working together as opposed to always approaching it from the adversarial system. It takes a new and different integrated approach.
And how do you personally feel, on a personal level, how do you feel about that? Do you feel apprehensive that what if this person does reoffend? How much responsibility?
I think the program that I personally set up in conjunction with the police was a realistic program. We worked with mental health professionals, we worked with the policing system, and we worked with just medical professionals and the person's family. And we set up a realistic plan that has worked for almost a decade.
Stephen, do you support, realistic plans, as Karen outlines, to try to bring these people back into the community and monitor them?
I think so. As long as we're going to release them, I think the community has to take some responsibility for protecting themselves. And there are, circles of support where community members will assist these sex offenders who are being released and who are a high risk, but they've served their entire sentences. So I applaud Karen and I applaud the police across the country who are trying to do those imaginative things. As long as we're going to release these people, we need to the steps in our communities to protect society.
Very quickly, Steve, one thing that needs to change then.
Well, I think we need a mechanism in our system that says if you're still a high risk to reoffend at the end of your sentence, we're not going to let you go. There are charter issues, but I think they can be overcome.
Karen, one quick thing that needs to change.
Just working together, I think, is the approach. Again, I'm hearkening back to the police going to the media first instead of going in and arresting Peter Whitmore.
Okay, well, thanks to both of you. A very interesting debate this morning.